This is Voices of CX Podcast Season 5. Recently, the speed of change feels like it's stuck on fast forward, and no one knows what's going to happen next. So we've made it our job to keep you up to speed and help you bring out the very best of your business by discussing the latest ideas with industry professionals, top research institutions, and influential thought leaders. Voices of Customer Experience podcast is brought to you by Worthix, a survey platform that self-adapts according to the changes of the market and the world. Discover your worth at worthix.com. Professor Thales Teixeira is the co-founder of digital disruption consultancy Decoupling.co. Previously, he was the Lumry Family Associate Professor at Harvard Business School, where he taught for 10 years. His two primary research domains are digital disruption and the economics of attention. He's also been an expert reviewer for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration under President Barack Obama, and he's one of the current judges of CNBC's Disruptor, 50 Most Innovative Startups. He has consulted or advised top executives of over 15 of the Fortune 100 companies. Welcome to one more episode of Voices of Customer Experience podcast. We're on Season 5, and today I am joined by Thales Teixeira. Hi, Thales. How are you?
I'm fine. How about yourself?
Great. How do people pronounce your name in the U.S. and in English?
So Uber drivers pronounce it as Thales. Some people in Starbucks pronounce it as Thales. But I've heard all sorts of variations, so I'm not bothered by any of them anymore.
But professionally, you use the actual pronunciation of your name as Thales, I would imagine?
Thales.
You do, Thales. Okay,
Yes.
There we go. Perfect. So that's what I'll use, Thales. Thank you so much for coming on. One of the main reasons I invited you here was because of how much I identified with the material that you have published that really caught my eye because of the uniqueness in the way it perceives the relationship of the customer with companies. So for our listeners who have not read your material yet and aren't familiar with who you are and what you do, can you give us a quick rundown of not only who you are, what you do, but also what motivates you and what makes you passionate about customers to begin with?
Sure. So I came to the United States in 2004. I did 5 years of a PhD studies at the University of Michigan. My PhD is in quantitative marketing. So my two passions was understanding customers as well as measuring customer relationships and measuring all aspects of the relationship between customers and businesses. So in 2009, I joined the Harvard Business School as an assistant professor at the time. And so mid-2019, I completed 10 years as the faculty at the Harvard Business School. There, I had two areas of research. One was the first 5 years of my tenure there was working on the economics of attention, and I built out this area. If you go to the website www.economicsofattention.com, you will see much of my work on trying to measure and monetize as well as take advantage of low ways to capture customer attention to build brands and to increase sales. That led to the second portion of my work on my research, which was trying to understand how startups disrupt markets and how established large companies, traditional companies, should respond to this new wave of digital disruption. And that's how I came about writing my book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, which takes a very customer-centric approach to digital disruption, as opposed to the traditional technology focus or the approach of how startups are disrupting big businesses. My view is it's not startups, it's not technology that's disrupting markets, it's customers. Customers changing behaviors and customers changing needs and wants are creating opportunities for these startups. That's it in a nutshell. But what motivates me is really to demystify this process that has been going around in many countries, in many industries. Many people still focus on technologies as the main disruptive ingredient. My view and my learning, the lessons that I've taken through 8 years of research is that it's all about the customer.
So I like how you refer to it as customer-driven digital disruption in your book and in the articles that you write. And that's something that for me was really impactful because I spend a lot of my time talking about this and trying to convince companies of this. And in my keynote, I talk about a lot of the same companies that you do, like Blockbuster. I talk about Nokia. I talk about BlackBerry. And when I talk about BlackBerry, it's kind of bittersweet for me because I was such a massive BlackBerry fan I was crazy about their technology. I loved BBM. Like, for the young millennials that are listening to this, I know you have no idea what I'm talking about, but the older millennials and the Gen Xers will. And they were an amazing company that had a really loyal fan base. And even though all of their metrics were pointing at a very satisfied customer, it still didn't keep them from leaving once Apple came out with the iPhone, right? So is that kind of where you focus and what you're looking at?
I think it's a good starting example for us to understand the commonalities across industries. So BlackBerry came out with one of the first portable tools to allow people to use email. And so lo and behold, the first group or swath of customers to adopt it were business people that needed to do email on the road. And so many adopted BlackBerry devices, and it grew tremendously fast. But then this group of business people had joined another group of younger, savvier customers who wanted to entertain themselves. Entertaining is a bigger market than the email market. And so young people and medium-aged people started to use Facebook and Google and many other tools and online videos and streaming music. And when Apple came out with its devices that allowed you to entertain yourself on the go, then it increased the market tremendously. And so consumers were already trying to do these activities with other devices and with their laptop computers. It turns out that when Apple came about, it just stole much of the market from BlackBerry and from other, Nokia being one of them. So it was consumers who wanted to move forward with their consumption choices. And it turns out that Apple was quicker to identify this and provide simple, easy to use products for that. But did Apple have any revolutionary new technologies that others didn't have? In my mind, the answer was
No,
no.
no, they didn't.
They have off the shelf technologies, they have an amazing ability to design for it, but they didn't have any proprietary new technologies that didn't allow Nokia, BlackBerry, and others to offer similar solutions to customers.
Nor did they have necessarily access to more capital or better brains. All of the talent or everything that went into producing the iPhone was basically commoditized. Same technology, same brains, same resources, right? They just had the right mindset when they were designing the product, right?
Well, I'd probably say that, many decades ago that was true, Mary, but it's hard to dispute in the last 10, 15 years that Apple had not better people and more access to capital. I think indeed they were doing successfully with the Macs, but launching the iPhone springboarded them to new opportunities, and new opportunities brings in better people and more capital, and then they become hard to stop, and today it's very hard to compete with better products in which Apple decides to enter.
But Apple isn't immune to a disruptor, are they?
No, absolutely not. Apple has entered categories in which they haven't succeeded in certain software and certain other categories, and so that is a testament to moving to another category which you have different sets of customers with different needs. The game is an entirely open game and amenable to other startups or tech companies to come in and overpower them.
One thing that I read you talk about a lot was the way that big giants, and maybe one day Apple was the underdog, but nowadays it is a giant, and how giants deal with startups and with disruption. Can you talk about that a little bit? I read you talking about either acquisition to build or to just absolutely shelf products and technologies as a way to safeguard, the way Kodak did with the digital camera, etc. Can you talk a little bit about that? I remember you gave a very strong example about Yahoo under Marissa Mayer. Is that her name?
Yes.
And their strategy in acquiring startups to try to increase their value.
Okay. So when you look at many of the bigger established companies, what we call the incumbents in different markets, the way a business grows and becomes a large conglomerate like Yahoo was once and Kodak as well is by growing into new markets and growing into new products. So they go to new countries, they go to new products, and they start fulfilling more of different customers' needs. In the process of growing like that, you end up creating products that aren't always best in class. Kodak probably had great cameras, but it had other cameras that weren't so good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with Yahoo. In the beginning, it had a great portal, but it ventured into other businesses that it wasn't as good. And so being not as good in a new market is essentially the beachhead, the opportunity for startups to come in and do better. So startups identify one little thing that a big company is not doing so well or has missed the opportunity, and they enter that market, right?
A
So
little kink in the armor, right?
that's right. So when in the hospitality industry, all the big hotels, Marriott, Sheraton were interested in replicating their properties, owning the properties, and managing hotel properties across the world. They didn't realize that some people just wanted to stay in other people's homes, and this created an opportunity for Airbnb to come about. In the beginning, a startup that had very few people, arguably not as good people in the beginning as Marriott or Sheraton had. They didn't have the money initially. They didn't have any new technology. And so one argument could be like, how can a startup grow and, take on giants? The main argument is that they focused on a very little sliver of opportunity. And so they focused on something very small and they grew that opportunity. And the large established companies didn't worry about that opportunity because they didn't have a business model that allowed them to make money in that. They had a standard traditional business model. And that's how Airbnb grew. That's how other startups grew to provide better services than, for example, Yahoo. And when Yahoo and big companies are confronted with that, what they can do are just a handful of things. One is they can try to buy the startup. Many cases, as I showed in my book, Yahoo bought about 200 startups in the last 15 years. And almost all of them, they weren't able to fully integrate or manage the company. They closed the vast majority of them. So acquisitions don't often work. The second option is you can build your own competing service. And sometimes that does work, but many times it doesn't, right? Marriott, only recently Marriott has created a business around home sharing. Now we all know that Airbnb has been very successful. Why did it take Marriott 15 plus years to realize that, to start acting? And so when companies react, they tend to either react too slowly. And the other point that I've noticed is they tend to react by doing what I call watered down versions of innovation. So instead of doing something better than the startup, because the new business model or the new product or service that they offer tends to be in conflict with their original business model, in order to appease all of the executives in the company, they kind of have to water down the innovation such that it doesn't attack them. So let me give you one example. When beauty startups came about with sample boxes, subscription boxes that had samples of beauty products that were sent to people's homes, women's homes mostly, and this Birchbox was one of the first one, Ipsy, the other one, then came 100 other ones. Sephora did respond and create its own Sephora Play, but initially it thought of the idea of, instead of sending the boxes to people's homes, to have people go to the store to pick up the boxes. Why? Because they didn't want to reduce the foot traffic to the Sephora stores, because that's where they made most of their money. So the subscription box was created to give more convenience to consumers so they didn't have to go to the store. But originally Sephora watered down that innovation by forcing customers to do what they did not want to do, which was go to the store to pick up the box. So that's an example of how companies watered down the innovation because they have conflicting interests.
To fit into the current value proposition that they offer, or the current business model that's in place, right?
Exactly, Mary. And this phrase that you said, to fit into, companies, I've visited with lots of companies all around the world and talked to many CEOs. All of them say they're highly customer centric, but in reality, most of them are not.
Right.
They make decisions that are best for them. And if it's good for the customer, so be it. But they never really, or hardly ever, say, I'm going to make a decision that is best for my customer, even if it is not as good as for me. So I don't really prioritize my customer in detriment of me. And by doing what you say, fitting into their own model, it means that I'll do anything for a customer as long as it's good for me.
In the past weeks, we've seen drastic fluctuations in customer buying patterns and sentiment. Now, more than ever, in this time of need, it's important to monitor and track how your customers perceive your processes and experiences. If you'd like to know more about how Worthix can help your company stay ahead of customer expectations, reach out for a demo at worthix.com. And this brings me to something that you mentioned in your book, which is the fact that companies are obsessed with their competitors instead of being obsessed with their customers. So they're always looking to the side and trying to outplay their direct competitors, and they're forgetting about what their customers actually want. And this leaves a lot of room for disruption, right?
Of course, and you summarize it very well. What I find interesting is to ask the question, why did it come about this way? We're all people working in companies. We know customer centricity is critical to success. Why do we still obsess about our competitors? And the reason we do that is because we were trained that way. When we were in business school, if we did business school, or when we read books of successful companies in the past, there were few competitors in many large markets. It was about Coke competing with Pepsi, BMW competing with Audi and Mercedes, IBM competing with Apple. And so when you have many big competitors, you end up creating the opportunity to really play chess games against each other. And in chess games, you're really playing to figure out what is the position I want to achieve? How do I undertake my competitor? They do an action, I do a reaction, and then they do another action. And by the way, in business schools, that's how students were trained in the past. Michael Porter talked about competitive strategy. There's many, many other academics and consultants that took a very game theory, competitive strategy perspective. And that worked very well in the past when you have few big companies competing for a huge market in which customers really don't have many options.
Right.
As a customer in the past, if I wanted a luxury car in Germany or an import car in the US, I had three options: BMW, Mercedes, or Audi. I didn't have much power. And so companies really didn't worry too much about us. They worried about their competitors, what those competitors were doing. What has happened in the last few years, as we all know, is the locus of power has changed from companies to consumers. Now, if you go to any supermarket, how many different types of soda are there? How many different brands of cars, makes and models of cars are out there? There are dozens and dozens and dozens. And so consumers have regained the power in the relationship. And executives in large companies need to start moving away from focusing or obsessing about their competitors into focusing on understanding and delivering more value to their customers, which they don't fully do.
You're absolutely right. It reminds me, when you were giving the example of the automakers, it reminds me of FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automotive, that controls a lot of big brands here in the US that people don't even know. So, like Jeep and Dodge Ram and many, many different vehicles are owned by FCA, not only Fiat and Chrysler per se. And it's interesting because recently, I think like 2 years ago, they announced that they were going to stop producing sedans because that's not what the market was clamoring for. They moved their value prop into SUVs, trucks, and crossover vehicles. So for me, it was an amazing. Okay, let's put the pollution thing aside. They're coming out with hybrid trucks now,
Mm-hmm.
but it was still pretty amazing for a company to be that customer centric, where they were able to hear their customers and re-strategize entirely. So people who are involved in the auto industry understand how expensive it is to stop producing a car, stop producing the chassis that's underneath, it's the main make of the vehicle, and switch strategies entirely. So cutting an entire type of vehicle out of your offering is a really bold move. And they did that empowered by the customer's choice and by the customer's decision. And it proved to be very successful for FCA, and other competitors actually followed in suit. But it was still really risky. And I applauded that effort of them to listen to their customers and implement the changes that their customers were asking for.
Yes, I think you're dead on this example. There's some nuances around this story, which is many auto manufacturers have been moving towards larger, bulkier cars. Ford's best-selling car is the Ford 250, which is essentially half of the car is not a passenger car. Half of the car is a cargo. It's the cargo truck, and that's the
And how
best-selling
many
car in
truck
America.
owners actually use it for utility, right? How many
Yeah,
people are loading up the back of their truck?
yeah. But the reason Ford loves these is because they make so much more margin on these trucks
Of course. Of
than
course.
having passenger cars. And so SUVs are also more profitable for auto manufacturers. So, listening to you, Mary, the devil's advocate could say they just did this because they can make more money, right?
Oh, but hold on. I think that customer centricity is absolutely a growth strategy.
Yeah.
And I'm all about it. I think what I advocate in this industry is maybe a little bit different than what other people are doing, where they're looking at the heart of the customer and they're being very romantic about it. I like being practical about it.
Mhm.
So I think that the best possible profit you can have is the profit that's coming from your customer's happiness. You
That's
know?
good. That's a good point. Now let me go even further because it's easy for you to point at a company, for us to point at companies and say, oh, look at those companies. They listen to the customer and they knew they would make a lot of money by delivering on that customer request, and so they did it. I would kind of say that is like it's definitely some element of customer centricity, but it's a mild version.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you another example. So I visited one of the biggest insurance companies in China recently. It's called Ping An Insurance. And Ping An, they're in the business of insurance, and they started realizing that they started creating apps for their customers. And one of the big pain points for customers in China is you have to pay for the doctors and the hospitals out of pocket, and you never really know if you're going to get reimbursed by your insurance companies. And if you don't have much money, you're very wary of paying out of pocket. And so they said, we're gonna help you. We're gonna help you. Number one, before you pay, realize if you're gonna get your money reimbursed. And two, we're gonna help you figure out what doctors are cheaper and how to go about requesting this reimbursement in a very easy manner using an app. Executives at Ping An told me at the time of this application, it started getting lots and lots of downloads. And they had the challenge, do we invest money in this or not? Make this app much better, improve all the functionalities and so on, and advertise the app and so on. Create a real business around it. And basically, what their team realized is they had no clue how to make money on this app at the time. We don't know. This app is for free. We don't know if this is a business. We don't know whether we can make money on that. And so they asked themselves the question, we have no monetization strategy. Should we invest a lot of money in this app? Yes or no? And one of the executives that I met with said, in the past, the answer would have been a resounding no. Why? The company is big. It needs to make money out of all the products and services that it invests in. And so if you don't know, there's no clear path to monetization, the answer would be no. But recently they said they looked at Alibaba and looked at a lot of Chinese startups that have built gigantic businesses that weren't clear how they were monetized in the beginning. And so they decided, let's do something different. Let's invest in this business because it has a lot of value for our customers. We don't know if we can capture some of this value or not in the future, but we don't care. Let's do something different. And they invested it. And this became a multi-billion-dollar business that has spun off and become very successful. Now they're able to monetize it, but at the time they weren't. I would argue that this is a story of high customer centricity.
Is this what you in your book refer to as customer-sided synergies?
That's right. The customer side synergies are actually synergies not from the company's point of view. When FCA decides to build trucks and cars, they have a synergy in production because they can save money by building both of them under one platform, right? So that's a
Mm-hmm.
firm side synergy. And that benefits the company, makes costs lower, and so the company makes money. A customer side synergy is actually on the customer's end. So when you decide to use Outlook email and you decide to use LinkedIn and you decide to use your Hotmail account or any other Microsoft service, the same example with Google services, it makes it easier for you to start using them all together in conjunction because you don't need to open up web pages. You have to look in Google Maps. You already go on your email account. You just click, you go direct to the map. Now Google is starting to advertise flights. If I have to travel, I click and I can purchase a flight. These are all synergies on my side, the customer. It
Mm-hmm.
makes it easier for me to do all my activities if I gather them all in one service provider. And that is a customer side synergy. It's the opposite view on what firm side synergies are. It's in the benefit of the customer, not necessarily on the firm.
Apple is master at doing this. It's basically a cult. Honestly, like I'm an Apple user. The listeners of this podcast know because I talk about it all the time. But for me, it's so seamless. It's so seamless for me to live within the Apple universe then I'm not changing it for anything. And here's the interesting part. It not only dominates my personal life, but it's spilled over into my professional life as well. Because when I'm faced with the option of getting a PC or a Mac, what do you think my option's going to be? A Mac, even at work. Why? Because if I'm looking at something on my phone, I can select that text, copy it, and paste it immediately into my laptop. I can't do that with a Windows thing. My phone
Yeah.
connects, my text messages, everything is connected and integrated with my MacBook Pro. That's also connected to my iPad, that's connected to my watch, that's connected to everything. So I live in this like Apple hive, you know? And to be really honest, I love it. I love it. And I think that that's extremely synergetic.
And
Am I
that's,
right?
yep.
Did I get the gist?
That's right. That's customer side synergy in its highest level possible. And Apple is banking on this. When it decides to launch a fitness tracker, when it decides to launch its car, it hopes that it will convince you that adding that additional product or a service like cloud computing to your current realm of services, you will benefit even more in this network of synergies, even if it might not launch the best product in its category. So
Yeah.
let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Because you get tremendous benefit out of having all these products synced together, the benefit of customer side synergies is Apple can launch a car that might not be best in class,
Mm-hmm.
and you might still buy it because you buy it because of this integration with the rest of your life, as you talked about it. And the integration is more important than you evaluating independently, is this the best car on the market?
Yeah.
And so I advocate for companies to really benefit by that, because that allows them to go into new markets that they don't have prior experience. Apple would not have prior experience in the auto industry, yet be successful because you're providing synergies to the customer. So it allows you to make, second or third grade products that eventually might become best in class, but
Yeah.
they don't need to be the best product in the market on the onset. And that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, I remember when the Apple Watch launched, it was definitely not the best out there. But they managed to improve it over time so that nowadays it is the best like wearable, let's say, to that regard. And they were far from being the first company to launch it. And so you're right, it really does create almost like a loyalty safety net when they do tank in one product or another, because people will hang on because they're so integrated in other ways that they won't walk away from the brand. If I were only an iPhone user, it would be really easy for me to change to a competitor, to Samsung, etc. But if I go to Samsung, I have to change every single other device in my life, and it's simply not worth the effort. So I don't do it. Even if Apple comes out with a new iPhone that isn't as spectacular as Samsung or any of the other competitors, I'll still rebuy an iPhone because I want to maintain that connectivity in my life. I'll give you an example. You spoke about a car. I recently had to choose between those German manufacturers for purchasing a luxury vehicle. And you know that ultimately I went with the vehicle that had the best integration with Apple CarPlay. It sounds stupid,
Wow.
but that it really was one of the main motivators, because one of them had seamless integration with CarPlay and the other one didn't. And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. Even though Apple's not producing cars, just the CarPlay is already enough to help maintain that connectivity somehow. So it's really amazing. It's great insight.
I think the general lesson for me here was, when I looked at all this customer side synergy, was that, first of all, this is what I really advocate for, is for companies that have more than one product or service out there, they shouldn't be thinking of what is our product portfolio or what is our service portfolio. They should be thinking of who's our customer, what are the series of activities that our customers have to go through in order to evaluate, compare, purchase, use, and eventually dispose of goods and services, and try to map out this customer value chain and figure out where they want to play and what types of solutions what they don't want to offer to their customers. Because the way I think about it, it's not as a portfolio of products, but a portfolio of solutions. And so companies are in the business of delivering solutions. Sometimes these solutions manifest themselves into products. But it is a mistake to, over time, saying, somebody asks, what is your company? What do you do? Oh, I build I manufacture product A, B, C, D, and E. No, that's the manifestation of your strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right? A product is the manifestation of a bunch of work being done to solve a customer problem. But if you keep focusing only on products, eventually you will get beaten by many other startups or competitors that will create better solutions for their customers because they're really much more inclined to solving the problem versus selling a product.
If you've been struggling with the whole work from home thing, we've got you covered. Worthix's Work From Home University will be sending weekly advice on how to be productive, cut out distractions, and just stay sane in general straight to your inbox. And if you're curious on how we're tackling work from home here at Worthix, just follow us on Insta, Twitter, and LinkedIn for updates. Yeah, it reminds me of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, where it's not the what, it's not the how, it's the why. Understanding why customers are buying, understanding the motivation behind those decisions, and keeping that as your north for the strategic decisions that your company makes, right?
That's right. And so, we started out the conversation about talking kind of about this customer centricity and customer experiences. And one of the big realizations that I've had is by going to these companies, whenever you talk about customer experience or customer journey, generally the CEO of the company says, that's the purview of my chief marketing officer.
Mm-hmm.
So go talk to him or her. This is a very, very bad and detrimental mindset to say basically the top person in the company should not be that worried or focused or spend time and resources on understanding customers, their behavior, what they do and don't do. There's somebody lower down the pecking order for that. All companies exist because of customers. That's what Peter Drucker said. And so a CEO that pawns off any conversation about, customers' behavior into somebody else in the organization is already not thinking it in a customer-centric point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I wrote the book and I started giving names like the customer value chain, then suddenly CEOs started looking and saying, oh, that's important. This is a CEO type of initiative that we need to understand.
Right.
So it's like renaming important things until they get it, until they understand that kind
Yeah.
of understanding evolving customers' needs and wants is at the heart of any company's strategy, and the CEO should be responsible for that.
So this is how you're contributing to solve this problem in the market. You're working directly alongside CEOs, the C-suite in general, to try to bring customer centricity into the heart of the company.
Customer centricity, customer centric innovation. Because all CEOs say, okay, when you say the word innovation, the CEO says, I want to talk to you. When you say the word customer, the CEO says, oh, go talk to my CMO.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make any sense in my mind, right?
Yeah.
And so I have to say, well, it's about innovation. And they say, okay, innovation is important. Let's talk. And I explain to them,
Buzzwords.
yeah, but it matters. And then I explained to them, okay, so what have you been doing? And I asked them, and then they explained to me, and I said, it's either a firm-centric approach to innovation. Basically, the firm is trying to say, what should we develop? What R&D should we put behind to develop products and services that we will make a lot of money on? And I say, okay, there's an approach. It's a firm-centric approach, but that might fail for X, Y, Z and reasons, right? You're really looking about yourself. And at the end of the day, customers adopt products and services. It's not the company that adopts it. So you can launch whatever you want in the market. If customers don't adopt, then it's going to be a failure. The same way with technology. So CEOs care a lot about technology, and they say, okay, if you build that technology and you put it in the market, doesn't mean customers will adopt it. And they say, well, but it's a very innovative new technology. I can give you a long list of innovative technologies that have been passed over because customers choose not to adopt it. Technologies come and go. The ones that are successful are the ones that customers choose to adopt.
That's
And
awesome.
so that's what matters, right? That's what they need to understand. And slowly we start moving from a product-centric innovation strategy, a technology-centric innovation strategy, or a firm-centric when the benefits the company, to a customer-centric innovation. Why? The market is out there available to everybody. Those customers will choose to adopt products or services, and that decision will dictate winners and losers and disruptors and disrupted. And so why don't you start with that and back out what you need to do to offer what they want instead of you just saying, I'm going to offer what I think is cool or sexy or awesome, or I will make money, and let them decide whether they're going to buy it or not.
And it's interesting because when innovation fails, companies do tend to blame the research and development department, like, oh, you guys didn't think this technology through.
That's right.
And, using your own words to prove my point, the lack of innovation in a company is a customer centricity problem and not an R&D problem. That probably blows some minds when you say that in your meetings, doesn't it?
It does. It actually, the beauty of doing keynote speeches as I do for many companies and many events is nowadays everybody has a phone or an iPad, and so they take pictures of slides. And because I'm with the opposite side, generally when they take pictures, they have flash. So, I have probably 50 slides in my deck, and I know which ones are the best ones. I have real-time instant feedback because I see the number of flashes going off. And every now and then I keep saying, oh, I think this one's going to get a lot of flash, and then it doesn't. And then I keep a mental note. All right, I'm not going to use that slide next time. Oh, this one I don't know. Oh, so many slides. Oh, I'm going to keep using it. And what you just said, that lack of innovation is a customer centricity problem, not an R&D one, is a big opening moment for them. Yeah. Because as you say, many times they go back to their R&D team and say, you know what, give me a better technology, give me a better product. Yeah. They go to their chief strategy officer,
fire the VP.
Yes, and get a better strategy. And they go up to somebody. CEO's job is not just forcing people to come out with things that they can't. They need to figure out,
absolutely
right? And it's so, and they say that's exactly how it works in our companies. And they say, it's as if you were in our meetings all along, Professor Teixeira. And I said, it turns out just like when you go to the doctor says, I've seen this before 1,000 times. Uh-huh. Companies' problems are like this. Every company thinks they have a unique problem. In reality, once you start looking at many companies, the problems are very common. And so therefore the solutions are quite common.
Yeah. That's interesting because, I tend to tell I'm a highly empathetic person, and I think it's actually very common in the customer world to have highly empathetic people working in it. But I sometimes tell my friends, hey, you know what? I know that you think this problem is really big and daunting, but to be honest, I'm pretty sure that somebody has written a book on it. And it's the exact same thing with you. You've literally written a book about it. So even though sometimes we think that our problems are unique to our organization or to our personality, to be honest, it's probably a widespread issue that someone has written a book on.
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for coming on here. If people do want to quote something out and tag you somehow, what's the best way to reach you on social media? What's your favorite channel?
I both use LinkedIn as well as Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Thales HBS on LinkedIn. But if you just Google my name, Thales Teixeira, or go to my agency's website, www.decoupling.co, you can read articles that I've written about these topics. You can pick up the book, or you can just contact me and tell me your particular story of when was the last time you bought a product just because it integrated with the iPhone and your Mac.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, go and pick up Thales Teixeira's book. I can definitely say that in season 5, it has been the biggest mind blower so far. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been great having you.
Oh, thank you, Barry. It was a pleasure to be talking with you this last hour.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on one more episode of Voices of CX podcast. This podcast is hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, edited and co-produced by Steve Barry. Voices of CX is brought to you by Worthix. Keep up with the speed of change at worthix.com.